Please remain seated. The show will begin in 3, 2...
Like a Hellcat. For more awesome content, like and subscribe now.
It was Halloween of 2006, and I was 7 years old. My name is Billy, and I'm an office worker, now 25. I never thought that I'd share this story, but after the numerous reports of serious injuries and casualties that occurred in my hometown, I can't stay silent anymore. I was a good kid, always got decent grades, and always gone to bed at curfew. My parents kept me on a short leash, never let me go out trick-or-treating. We lived in a very big woodland area. I was born and raised in a strict Catholic household, and I was very limited on what I could do as a child. I wasn't allowed to listen to any music besides gospel. I wasn't allowed to wear clothes that weren't modest or formal. I wasn't allowed to watch movies unless they were religious ones. The worst of it were the punishments. My parents hated me. On the night of October 31st, they left me in the care of a babysitter named Joshua, who was the son of the preacher at our local church. It was 7:30 and my parents left to go out to dinner with friends. I waited till Joshua fell asleep on the couch before I carefully and cautiously slipped out the back door of the patio, dressed in a white sheet with 2 holes, holding an empty brown paper bag. My parents weren't expected back until midnight, so I had some time to snag tons of candy from the various houses that were just 2 miles away. I made sure to grab a flashlight to help myself navigate through the darkness. I treaded west, and it was a foggy, moonlit night. Autumn leaves rustled on the ground, and the sound of grasshoppers could be heard from the tall grass. The air was crisp and cool, and after several minutes of strolling along, whistling to myself casually, I came across Specter Road. Specter Road has been seldom used the past couple of years, and it has been recently closed to the public. The kids at school often spread rumors about a ghost clown that supposedly haunts the road on All Hallows Eve. According to the legend, the ghost clown was once a man who owned a massive circus back in the 1920s. There are scattered ruins of the circus that still remain to this day, decaying ride structures and a crippling feeling of dread that fills the area that at some point was full of joy and laughter. The man's name was Arthur Boyle. Arthur was known to be a mentally disturbed person, apparently had suffered from severe depression due to the financial pressures of trying to provide for his family. Unfortunately, his dream was short-lived when he could no longer afford to keep the circus open and was forced to shut it down. What became of Arthur Boyle? There are many versions of the story. The most common one is that on Halloween of 1923, he just snapped for no reason and lured his own children out into the woods and fed them poisonous candy. He then dragged his wife away and drowned her in the lake before slicing her mouth with a razor blade to give it a carved smile, then had fed her corpse to wild dogs before blowing his own brains out on the road. Another version is that Arthur gambled away his wife's inheritance that was supposed to be left for his children, and he regretted his actions, gotten drunk. He wasn't paying attention to where he was going and stumbled blindly in the middle of the road, only to get struck by a speeding motor car. Another was that he found out his wife had slept with someone else during the years of their marriage, and that his children weren't really his. The man, so enraged, hacked them all to pieces, and then left the house that same night, presumably hopped on a train to go elsewhere and was never heard from again. It is possible that he didn't make it far and had froze to death from the bitter cold of that cruel winter, that fateful year. It is said that if you are wandering alone on Specter Road on Halloween night, the ghost clown Arthur Boyle will try to entice you to follow him, and if you succumb to the temptation, your cause of death will be one of the following: strangulation, inflicted gunshot wounds, being eaten alive, drowning, or struck out of nowhere by a speeding truck or vehicle. Anyone who survived an encounter would have nightmares about the killer clown and claim to be stalked at school or anywhere else they go. It is even said that the mention of his name would summon him to you when you least expect it. Those who poked fun or made a mockery of the ghost clown would pass away in their sleep. They would be discovered the next morning, having smiley faces carved on their foreheads and their stomachs. I didn't believe in the ghost clown. I laughed at the idea, but looking back on that night, it makes me want to slap myself, because I was really being dumb. It was nearing 10 at night, and I had just left the last house on the far end of the block. Shining my flashlight, I walked back the way I came, down Specter Road, and the air grew cold, a gust of wind traveling up my spine, causing me to tremble in the thin white sheet that shielded my bare skin. Owls were perched on branches and were hooting, and the wind howled. As my eyes through the holes in the white sheet scanned my surroundings, I thought I heard the snapping of twigs and a loud honking noise. It startled me. I stopped abruptly and I looked around quickly. Nothing. I then averted my gaze over to an iron gate. My curiosity nudged me to move closer, and I peered in through the rusty old iron bars to see the outline of a Ferris wheel in the distance. I climbed the gate and hopped over, landing in a mud puddle. I nearly slipped before trudging through the dirt and ascending a hill, then looking down to see many structures. The Ferris wheel was discolored, and it was halfway intact, a few of the metal seats dangling from loose bolts. The carousel had chipped paint, bright colors now faded, and had withered with age. The horses had screams of torment on their porcelain faces. The many midway game booths were rotting too, and some had old stuffed animals still put on display. There was even a cotton candy machine with large cracks that was toppled over. I examined the structures more closely. There was also this large tent that was white and had red stripes. It was covered in disgusting stains, and I don't know what compelled me, but I hesitantly went over to the tent and stuck my head in. The tent was empty, except for one thing. There was a trap door. I went in there and lifted the latch, opening the trap door before climbing down the wooden ladder. I found myself in an underground cavern. There were 3 separate tunnels, and I wasn't sure where they led. I just went down the first, and immediately I ducked when a group of bats flew above my head and made screeching noises. I shined my flashlight around and saw vintage posters of a clown that wore a monochrome suit with a ruffled collar, a cone hat, and makeup to match. He was on a unicycle holding a horn in his right hand, and he had this wild look in his eyes with a goofy smile. Below the picture was the inscription in bold letters that said, "Artie the Stupendous." I then realized that Arthur Boyle was not only the owner of this circus, but he was also the star attraction. A part of me actually started to feel terrible for laughing at all, because I saw he looked so happy in those pictures, and when you spend most of your time dedicated to the one thing you loved so much, dreams, they sadly don't always come true, or good things merely come to an end. I went further down the tunnel and saw crates full of circus stuff. A magician's hat, poker cards, a crystal ball, wooden toys, more stuffed animals, old midway signs, etc. Then I saw these newspapers dating back to 1923, starting with one that talked about the founding and grand opening of the circus, which was on February 11th that year. Then there was another newspaper that was dated just 3 months after, when the circus closed down permanently. What was all of this doing down here? I asked myself. Was this Arthur Boyle's hideout? Just how long it had been there? I then noticed dusty, empty beer bottles and soup cans on the ground. There was also a small oak table and an oak stool. I then left the tunnel after looking around in there and proceeded to the second tunnel. The second tunnel had a bed, a closet, and a desk with just old photographs. It was of Arthur Boyle, his wife and 2 sons that looked between the ages of 8 and 10 years old. I then left that tunnel, and I had stepped inside the final section of the cavern. As I shined my light into the room, I bumped into something heavy, and I looked up. There, hanging from a noose, a good elevation off of the ground on the high ceiling, was a skeleton dressed in a monochrome suit with a ruffled collar and a cone hat. In one bony hand, the corpse held a yellow horn, and in the other another photograph of the same man with his wife and children. My blood ran cold, and with a quivering hand, for some stupid reason, I poked the dead man with my right index finger, and all of a sudden, these big rats slithered out from underneath the collar of the clown suit and started jumping on me. I screamed and accidentally slipped on some sort of ball lying by my feet, and I tripped, diving face first into the hanging corpse. As I crashed into it, the rope gave way and the bony neck of the clown had made this loud snap. The next thing I knew, I was laying on my stomach, and the skull landed just an inch or two in front of me. I freaked the fuck out and staggered to my feet, pushing the body of the corpse off of me, and in my panic I stumbled out of the tunnel, tripping over the white sheet I wore as I ran like hell. I bolted out of the remnants of the abandoned circus, and like a monkey, I leaped onto the old iron bars of the rusty iron gate. I then scurried up, before hightailing back down the road towards my house. All of a sudden, there was this insane laughter booming from somewhere behind me, and the honking noise started up again. Someone was chasing me. As I ran faster, so did they. I didn't stop until I reached my house. I managed to climb through my bedroom window and then shut it behind me quickly. I then locked and drew the curtains to cover the window back up before I took off the white sheet. I then hid my bag of candy underneath my bed. I then sat down and tried to process what I just saw and heard. Did the ghost of the killer clown Arthur Boyle really chase me down that road? What if, before I could finish the thought, not a moment after did I hear a light tapping on my bedroom window. My heart sank. I ducked down and looked up to see a silhouette of someone standing outside my bedroom window. And after a minute or two, the tapping turned into loud knocking, which lasted 5 minutes. Then it stopped and was replaced with giggling, which lasted 10 seconds. Then heavy breathing. I trembled like a leaf. I didn't know what to do. Do I scream for help? Do I go look for my babysitter? Well, I reluctantly decided to leave my bedroom, and I crawled all the way to my bedroom door, and I fiddled with the knob nervously. I then pulled the door open and bolted down the hall to the stairs. There was this blood trail that was staining the wood and led all the way down to the bottom. I panicked and descended the stairs to find Joshua sprawled up on the floor on his back, with his throat slit. In my shock, I collapsed and passed out. I woke up in my friend's house that was about a half a mile from mine. I was sitting on the sofa next to my pal, Saul, whose mother then joined us. We were surrounded by cops and a detective. I then received the news that there was a car accident on the very same road I walked on while I had gone trick-or-treating. Apparently on their way home, sometime before I arrived back, my parents, while driving under the influence, skidded off the road and crashed into a tree. They were both killed. My mom's friend said Joshua had called them and said his grandfather had a stroke and he was needed back home early, and my parents agreed to come home earlier than planned. The car was just found 6 blocks up further from the neighborhood where I was at. Specter Road stretches out many miles till you reach the bridge that goes into the next town over, which is another 26 miles, and the quickest way to get to that road was through the woods. The long route was to take a detour from the opposite side through town that was just 3 miles apart from that road. When you leave the town, ideally, there would be 2 paths diverging. One that led to my friend's house, that was adjacent to the woods, that was on the east side. My house was located north. Specter Road was, of course, west of that, and the town itself was south. Not only were my parents killed, but my babysitter just moments before supposedly was pushed down the stairs by an intruder as the kitchen door was open wide. Someone was watching the house, saw me leaving, and apparently other people who were with this other person, all of them were dressed up as clowns. I'm sure that some of you are wondering if this story ends here. It doesn't. Just 2 years later, I was adopted by my grandfather and he moved into the house. Life was easier for me moving forward. Saul and I sat up in his treehouse in his backyard, and we were dressed up as Mario and Luigi for Halloween. It was nearing 9 o'clock and we were expected to be in bed in 30 minutes. But my friend's mom was sick with the flu and the cold medicine had knocked her out. So we took advantage of this and stayed up late. Saul knew about my experience that happened long before these series of events in this next part of the tale, but he didn't believe in the ghost clown, while a part of me no longer was a skeptic at this point. I don't know for certain if I was chased by a human dressed up as a psycho clown or by a murderous ghost, but I wasn't against the possibility that when I went down into that cavern, I disturbed something sacred. I was in a place I didn't belong. I had no business being there. I can't be sure 100%. I just know that I could have died. Then Saul had the idea that we go check out Specter Road. I told him no way. He laughed. Come on, Saul said. The ghost clown is just a myth to scare disobedient kids. All those deaths were purely coincidental. I wasn't entirely convinced. We soon left his property and we later walked through the woods. The woods were filled with the sound of crickets chirping and owls hooting. Frogs were also croaking in the background. We were walking for 45 minutes. We eventually reached a murky lake. It was huge. I then shivered. I had a terrible feeling. I remembered about the wife of Arthur Boyle who may have met her end at the lake at the hands of her own husband. I kept walking ahead as Saul stopped for a moment, and his eyes seemed to focus on something. I turned to him and called out. I asked him what was up, but Saul didn't respond. He just kept staring at something that was across from us. I followed his gaze. In the darkness, we saw 3 pairs of eyes staring back at us. My friend thought it was gang members that were known to frequent the woods in our area to do drugs and other illegal stuff. Stupidly, Saul shouted out something like, "Okay, assholes, you don't want none of this. I'm a certified black belt. Get out of here before I call the police." Pairs of eyes just kept staring at us before disappearing back into the shadows of the trees. Then we heard twigs snapping and a honking noise. We were stock still, and flashbacks of that night, 2 years prior, hit me like a ton of bricks. I was petrified with fear. "We need to go," I told him in a whisper. He tried to protest, but I pulled him along and we ran towards the road. We were about to head towards my house, but my friend insisted that it was just someone messing with us. I was going to go home, but I didn't want to leave Saul by himself. I contemplated calling my grandfather to come and get us, but I didn't want us getting into any trouble. We just stood there, just arguing back and forth. Then all of a sudden we heard the sound of laughter, and we stopped and listened. It echoed all around us. Again, my friend tried to act all tough and scare whoever was out there with us. Assuming it was one of the people out in the woods just moments before, I wanted to smack him. I wanted to smack him so hard. The laughter belonged to an older male. It went on for another few minutes and ceased. Then a fog rolled in and we saw the rusty iron gate. Footsteps, the sound of squeaky boots started approaching, and Saul suggested we hide at the ruins of the old circus. I was reluctant, but agreed. We climbed the gate and hopped over. We hid in one of the midway booths. We heard the laughter again as the sound of the squeaky boots inched closer to us, and we ducked down low, holding our breath as the footsteps passed us. Then Saul and I slowly peered out to see nobody. We both nodded to each other, and he asked me about the trapdoor, if it was still in the same exact spot as before. I shrugged my shoulders and responded with, "Why do you keep asking that? Does it even matter? That's what got me into trouble to begin with." Saul pouted and crossed his arms. I rolled my eyes. I told him I had enough and we were leaving. We started our way back to the front gate, and once we walked the several yards and reached it, I stopped and told him to go first. But Saul didn't reply. I turned around and saw no sign of him. I was confused. I called out his name. I was getting furious. Maybe he was hiding someplace. I searched the whole area. I even went to see the tent. But it was gone, and where there was the trapdoor was a dried up cement patch. I was even more curious then. Who did this and why? I then decided Saul had went another way, and so I left. I made my way east and called for him again. Nothing. The wind picked up a bit, howled and moaned. The crickets no longer chirped. The owls made scarce and didn't hoot once. Nothing but the wind and my own footsteps, the soles of my shoes making crunching noises on the graveled path. I was halfway and then I heard it again. The snapping of twigs, the squeaky boots, a man's mad laughter. And I slowly turned around as the fog circled me. Just 6 feet away was the outline of a figure, male, 7 foot, and as the fog cleared, the details became more distinct. It was a monochrome clown with a ruffled collar, cone hat, gloves, shoes, and makeup to match. He stood there and his eyes glowed red in the dark. I shrieked in terror. "The ghost clown! He's real!" The clown then extended his right arm and gestured with his index finger for me to follow. I shook my head and ran, shutting my eyes tightly. A woman's voice started screaming all around me, followed by the sobbing of young children. I rushed back to my house and never set foot on that road again. Authorities searched an entire year for Saul, and eventually the case closed. I know nobody believes me. I know what I saw and heard, though. Prank or not, I lost my best friend that night. That ghost clown is still out there, watching, waiting for some unsuspecting fool to fall into his trap.